first lesson comes from Mark chapter 10, verses 32 through 34. Jesus and his disciples were on the road going up to Jerusalem, with Jesus in the lead. The disciples were amazed, while the others following behind were afraid. Taking the 12 aside again, he told them what was about to happen to him. "Look," he said, "we're going up to Jerusalem. The human one will be handed over to the chief priests and the legal experts. They will condemn him to death and hand him over to the Gentiles. They will ridicule him, spit on him, torture him, and kill him. After 3 days he will rise up." Here are words that remind us that the truth can be hard to hear. Spirit, reveal your truth in the words spoken here. Amen. The second lesson continues with verses 35 through 45 of Mark chapter 10. James and John, Zebedee's sons, came to Jesus and said, "Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask." "What do you want me to do for you?" he asked. They said, "Allow one of us to sit on your right and the other on your left when you enter your glory." Jesus replied, "You don't know what you're asking. Can you drink the cup I drink, or receive the baptism I receive?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said, "You will drink the cup I drink and receive the baptism I receive, but to sit at my right or left hand isn't mine to give. It belongs to those for whom it has been prepared." Now when the other 10 disciples heard this, they became angry with James and John. Jesus called them over and said, "You know what the ones who are considered the rulers by the Gentiles show off their authority over them, and their high-ranking officials order them around. But that's not the way it will be with you. Whoever wants to be great among you will be your servant. Whoever wants to be first among you will be slave of all. For the human one didn't come to be served, but rather to serve and to give his life to liberate many people." Here are words that teach us to follow the way of Jesus means a life of service beside others, not a life of power over others. Spirit, reveal your truth in the words spoken here. Amen.
So friends, I so often feel that when I preach on a particular Sunday, I often disclose whatever I've been reading or have just read and how it might connect with our text today. And today, in fact, is no different. I just completed the book, Broken Faith, Inside the Word of Truth Fellowship, one of America's most dangerous cults. It was just came out, written by 2 Associated Press journalists who have spent years investigating this Spindale, North Carolina congregation. Uniquely, it is led by a woman by the name of Jan Whaley. This Christian community believes that she literally hears the direct voice of God, and through her, every part of church members' lives is directed and regulated. This group is known or notorious for the practice of blasting, which is when the Word of Faith members will surround someone they believe to be demonically possessed, and it seems everyone is demonically possessed at some point, according to them. And then they begin commanding the demons to get out of that person by yelling and screaming at the person. In the last 15 or so years within this congregation, blasting has added a new feature where the one who's believed to be demon-possessed is then violently beaten by women, teenagers, men, even young children. A couple of years ago, this practice was exposed in news reports by a young gay man who was blasted and beaten and who tried to report it to the authorities. The congregation has a long history of being accused of child abuse, but its tentacles are everywhere in Rutherford County, North Carolina, a small county, making it almost impossible to make the charges stick, especially when members are literally told to lie, if they must, to protect other church members. Recently, the church has become involved in North Carolina Republican politics and with the religious right, who, like them, claim to be persecuted for their faith, a faith that is actually currently seated at the very heart of political power in this country. This book is a gripping look inside the heart of, indeed, a Christian community gone deeply astray, and was really hard to put down as a read. And though at times I have to say I just was so frustrated at the literal behavior of some of these folks. I'm I just could not believe it. Like, really? Really? How do you do that and claim the name of Christ? But I do want to point out a particular term that the authors actually use in the title of the book, the word cult, which is often used to sort of label new religions or religion that aren't familiar to us, right? In academic circles, the use of the word cult rarely has a negative or pejorative connotation to it. And in fact, very early Christianity is often labeled a cult, which generally can be understood as a new religion with a very high commitment standard for members. Now, certainly that fits the early church, where members were expected to fully commit themselves to the point of death to their new faith, and seemingly they also held each other accountable. But new religions with high commitment levels are not, again, necessarily negative, or as I would say, toxic to body and soul. Early Christians were usually incredibly invested in their newfound faith, as other believers and other new faiths are. But that high commitment within a tight-knit community, again, is not necessarily a bad thing. And in fact, like in most religions, it can be a good thing, a positive part of one's life. These early Christians were radically committed to their new faith, and many were more than willing to give up their lives rather than give up their faith. And some did just that. So clearly there is a healthy form of a high commitment faith out there, one that isn't toxic or frankly at times just evil in practice. But communities like Word of Faith Fellowship, a sect within Christianity, and we don't get to sort of automatically do them out of the circle, cut them out of the circle just because we abhor their practices and sometimes their beliefs, that clearly practices a toxic form of faith. And I want to unpack what that toxicity really looks like within any faith, much less our own Christian faith. I have always been intrigued by new religions, but especially the toxic ones. And I think that is because I'm just always curious about that fine line between a healthy and an unhealthy faith. I often joke that I'm fascinated by faith communities like Word of Faith or the practices of Scientology because I'm looking for tips on how to become a cult leader. Though again, I know I am using the word cult incorrectly, and I'm using it, of course, in that negative sense here. But it really is a personal fascination about what it means to be part of a healthy, life-giving religion, rather than one that is death-dealing, even if it carries a facade of health and hope. Some believe there is no such thing as a truly healthy religion. And of course, I disagree with that. But I do understand that a lot of religion is pretty toxic, if not always to the degree of places like Word of Faith. Once, while I was serving as an associate pastor at a large church in Dallas that primarily served the LGBT community, a young man of perhaps 19 years old came into my office, literally gripping his Bible, his well-worn Bible, with a tight grip, trying to reconcile his beliefs with his newly realized sexual orientation. He had come from an especially fundamentalist Christian community that taught that homosexuality was an especially grave sin, and his parents and friends were bearing down hard on him to come back into the fold and reject this newly realized sexual orientation. He was distraught. He was so tortured by the self-hatred that he had been fed with his mother's milk, to paraphrase part of a poem by Audre Lorde, that when he left my office, I wondered if the poison he had been fed by others about himself would ever be gotten rid of. Sometimes the lies we are told and come to believe are so deep in our bones, so deep in our spiritual tissue, that they never truly get expelled from our bodies, spiritually speaking. Better, I thought, to have no Christian faith than the one he had been given by the people in that particular religious community. A pretty radical thing to say as a Christian pastor. Or I remember the time when I met a young gay man in his late 20s in a coffee shop who had actually contacted that particular church in Dallas to discuss this very issue, his struggle. But the very conservative Christian group that he was a part of would not allow him, give him permission to meet me in that coffee shop without having someone a table away watching us. A nice enough young woman, eyeing me as if I was the problem and not her. I have seen toxic religion, really toxic religion, and its effects can really be heartbreaking and life-changing and death-dealing. Now, what I've learned from all these books I've read about particular toxic religions are certain traits that are hallmarks of religion gone astray. When a religion tells you to cut off all your family and friends who don't share your religion, or to avoid those who ask you hard questions about your faith, then you're likely in a toxic faith. Avoid any faith that tells you that it's okay to lie in order to protect the organization or its leaders. A toxic faith is one where you're not allowed to question leaders or challenge their authority, or ones that say it's okay to demonize those who don't agree with you, who have left their faith. Or the ones that literally tell you not to be trusted and assign someone to watch you in a coffee shop when you're meeting someone else. Or one that so devastates that person coming out of that religion that any objective person might think it would have been better for your soul to have had no faith at all, if the only faith that that person can accept is one where God hates how you love another human being. Toxic faith is practiced when you're told not to look at any kind of information sources other than the ones that are approved by the religion. And a toxic faith is one where you are falsely told that everyone, the whole culture, is out to destroy your religion, and the correct response is to seek the destruction of those who so supposedly seek to destroy you. People of goodwill will always disagree within a religion and between religions, and one group's sins is another group's facts of life. I get that. But the measure of a toxicity of a faith is probably proportional to how we handle that disagreement with our community and how we handle those disagreements with those outside our community. And yet we know that churches with high demands, with high commitment levels, and sometimes very, very strict boundaries are ones where people are most active. That's the irony of all this. People like answers. They like clear answers, even if they're not always coherent, even if they only make sense within the context of that strict community. We crave certainty. I crave certainty almost about everything. But I suspect many of you have made peace with the reality of a mature and thoughtful faith, which is that it rarely offers us oftentimes black and white answers. For me, I've spent a lifetime looking for a radical and yet reasonable faith. One that invites me to a life of wholehearted commitment to an idea, to a person. And for me personally, I found that in this Jesus of Nazareth. And yet, I've seen how being radically committed to something or someone can so warp one's minds, one's reasons, one's rationality, that I've also committed to a faith rooted in reason. I've made a stand against, forgive me for my framing of it, I made a personal stand against, and this is bad, I know, but I use it, I'm against stupid religion. All right? Like, don't turn off your brain, folks. Don't turn off your brain. Any religion that asks you to turn off your brain, to not look at things that might criticize it, is a bad religion. It is a stupid religion, and it makes you stupid. Now, to those who think all religion as fundamentally unreasonable, fundamentally stupid, to its despisers, as the great 19th century liberal Christian theologian Friedrich Schleiermacher once called them, I get that my commitment on my part will fall on false and deaf ears. But the rest of us Christians and Hindus and Muslims and Jewish folks, we spend a lot of time engaging our faith with both our hearts and our minds. And thank goodness we do, because the world is a better place when people use their minds and hearts to practice their faith, to balance the tenets of our faith with all the other good gifts that God gives us to find truth. So I've laid out some of the traits of what I think of as toxic faith. Faith that kills souls, harms souls, sometimes kills people rather than give us life. Today's text was certainly a trigger for thinking about this issue, as well as the book I mentioned earlier. Let me explain why. Now, first you have Jesus here and his disciples making their way to Jerusalem. And Jesus has hinted to these men, and likely women, though they are sadly not mentioned here. We know that Jesus traveled with female disciples as well. That his arrival in the city will not signal the coming of a violent overthrow of the Romans, but a cataclysm of a different sort, at least on the surface. He makes it plain, as we in the South like to say, that he makes it plain right here, telling them that he will die and then he will rise again. But instead of digging deeper into the meaning of those words, they just ignore it. They don't think or inquire or ask him to explain. They just simply ignore the words of their master, choosing to look the other way. So many of us who are in toxic faiths, ones that crush soul and sometimes body, we ignore, ironically enough, the heart of our very religion. We don't listen to what our master says, our teacher, our God keeps telling us over and over again. That's why the people in the Word of Faith Fellowship in North Carolina can do what they can do. They ignore Jesus' teachings about love and kindness, about not lying, about not hurting people, your own people or other people. Jesus is telling the disciples here they will see their master lose everything. And because we and they don't want to hear a difficult and challenging word, they will go into denial about the plain meaning of Jesus' words here. What does that denial look like? The story says that then, after this little conversation, right? After Jesus explicitly tells them, I'm going to lose people. I'll rise, but I want you to know I'm going to lose in Jerusalem. What you want will not come about. What do they do then? A few of them, come to talk to Jesus about who would be in control of the kingdom he said was not likely to come about. Right? This powerful, rooted kingdom. This kingdom of this world with soldiers and armies and power. About who would be on the right or left hand of Jesus. Positions of power in the ancient world. They were given a model of sacrifice in Jesus. And their deeply flawed response, which would probably have been mine, was then to seek power, to seek control over other human beings. You want power, Jesus says? Then you must give that power away. You must serve others. Or at least you do in the realm that I am creating, the world that I am inaugurating, Jesus says. He speaks earlier of his sacrifice in predicting his death and resurrection, and they respond with a quest for power. And again, he points them to sacrifice. That to be great is not to be great, but a supposed nobody, a servant of others. In toxic faiths, one that the disciples were dangerously close to possessing before the events of Jerusalem, you ignore calls for actual servanthood. And that means not always getting your way. That means not harming people, but helping them. That means serving others and not demanding that you be served. That your interests or beliefs don't trump the freedom of others. As Jesus said about himself here, it means liberating people. Liberating. He literally uses that word here, or at least the translation does in interpreting the Greek here. And not enslaving them to you. Enslaving them to you, but serving them by doing the right thing by others. But wait a minute. I can hear those ready to offer you and I spiritual poison concealed inside of offers of food. I can hear them say that to liberate someone, one must cut them off from sources that might get in the way of their liberation. Right? I'm just protecting you by telling you not to look up negative information about us. Because it's all false. Liberation is understood as agreement with them. That's liberation. And that means it's okay to protect themselves by using tactics like lies and deceit and harassment, and by demanding they shouldn't believe their own lying eyes, but to trust their experience or their own reason, as admittedly fallible as all those things can be at times. I often tell our confirmands that all truth is ultimately God's truth, meaning that we Christians never have to be afraid of truth or facts. That such things are of God because, as Jesus says, the truth always sets us free. Yes, I know that truth is always contested. I get that. And that is why the latter part of today's text, I think, is also important. We find the story of blind man, Bartimaeus, right? Who cries out for mercy, only to be scolded for being so loud. Jesus asks that he be brought forth, and Jesus asks him what he wants. Sight. Sight, to see, he tells Jesus. And in that next moment, Jesus credits his faith for the fact that he can now see. Stories about blind people in the Gospels are never stories about the healing of a blind person. Right? They are most certainly living metaphors for those of us who seek truth, who seek to see the world as it is, as God sees it. Granted, the metaphors are complicated. They're not without shadow, with the decision oftentimes to use those without sight as a metaphor for those not being able to spiritually see. Ask a blind person how that comes off at times, right? I get that. But for me, the persistence of Bartimaeus is so important. He will not shut up or be shut down. And Jesus welcomes his persistence. He welcomes his persistence, hears that voice, and is willing to engage with him. Never trust a religious leader who wants you to shut up or shut you down, or who considers your request for answers to be wrong. A good leader will tell you what she knows or believes to be true, and will also tell you when she doesn't know what the truth of something might be, that she doesn't know everything about divine things or the will of God. But there is also something else about this story that gives us a clue on how to discern between a toxic faith and a healthy faith. And that is found in Bartimaeus' just base desire to see. Again, go beyond the literalism here and seek the spiritual, deeper spiritual meaning. A good faith, a healthy faith, is one that welcomes the truth. That welcomes the truth. The truth, for example, about the terrible thing that will happen in Jerusalem to this one that they love so deeply. The truth about difficult things, the things we can't always understand and maybe will never understand. And it seeks to see what Christ sees, which is a world that is complex and beautiful and horrible as our human hearts can sometimes be, and yet one that is worth dying for and then being raised back into. If anyone asks you to become blind or become blind again, then know what they are asking you is not what Christ is offering to you, which is a chance to open your eyes and see the world that Christ loves so deeply. And there really is in the end, right? The key to knowing what is being offered to us. Either a faith that blinds us and ultimately harms us by shutting us off from others, from reason, from the simple, plain truth of a thing. Or one who asks us to open our eyes to see what faith and reason can show us, what truth can be found, and which opens instead our connections to others, not shuts them down. Our connections to strangers and loved ones and believers, whoever they may be. Healthy faith expands our hearts and our minds and does not ever constrict our mind or our hearts. Faith, good faith, must be life-giving, reasonable, and yet radical for it to be true, for it to be good, for it to be of the Spirit. Amen. Friends, join me in prayer. Spirit of truth, we do ask that we see. We ask that we see the world for what it is, which is sometimes so incredibly beautiful, which is sometimes so incredibly horrible. We thank you for seeing us for who we are, for people who have sometimes gone so deeply astray that we have missed you and in a way denied you by the ways that we have loved or left so many unloved. Holy One, greet us in this moment. Forgive us. Empower us to see all that you see. And when we cannot see what you see, to be humble, to realize that indeed you know all and we do not. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Amen.